everyone, and welcome to Indonesia Unedited, a series of open and honest conversations about Indonesia. So I'm Jane.
And I'm Indra.
We're lecturers in Indonesian at the University of New England, one of the few remaining universities in Australia that actually teach the Indonesian language. And today we're going to talk about just that, the declining interest and opportunities to study Indonesian in Australia. Indra, the other day you were telling me about this conversation you had with someone on a bus, and it really got you thinking about this whole situation, hey?
Yeah, that's right, Jane. I think it was 2 months ago, and I met this lady on a bus, and we're on our way to UNE campus. And apparently it was her first day working at UNE. And then she started asking about, my role at UNE, because she thought I was a student. And I said, I'm a lecturer. And then she asked me, what do you teach? And then and I told her that I'm teaching Indonesian. It's one of the modern languages that we have at UNE. And they're like, oh, that's great. And then are you happy teaching Indonesian? Of course, I'm happy teaching Indonesian.
Hope so.
I have a big passion in teaching Indonesian, not only about the language, but also the culture, the politics, and society as well. And then she asked me, what's the challenges, in teaching Indonesian? And then that's when the conversation turns quite serious. And I said, well, the challenges is that how basically to increase students' interest in studying Indonesian, learning Indonesian, because we have a challenge, we have a problem that throughout the years, we have less numbers of Australians enrolled in Indonesian language programs. And that's only one of them. And it also happens to other modern foreign languages like Korean and so French and Japanese and all that. And Indonesian is one of the worst case. So I was wondering about that. So I asked her back, why, Australians become less interested in learning Indonesian or studying foreign languages. And that's when I got her. And she was like, that's a good question. And I'm quite embarrassed with that. But she couldn't give me the proper answer. So what do you think, Jane? You as an Australian, you probably have your own view about what's going on. Why more Australians become less interested in learning Indonesian?
Yeah, I think it's a really complex issue. And it's no wonder that lady couldn't give you an answer straight away, because I think there's a lot of issues to deconstruct there. And I think one of them is that we're in our comfort zone in Australia speaking English. Most Australians speak English as their first language, and it's seen as a global language. And so, it's enough to get by if you want to engage with the rest of the world, you want to advance your career. Speaking only one language is not an obstacle. But I think, we have this really strong commitment to monolingualism in Australia, even though we're a so-called multicultural society. Right. But I think, English is the dominant language here, and it kind of goes unchallenged that's the case. I think one of the elephants in the room here is that Australia has to recognise that we do have this underlying prejudice, this historical hangover from this obsession with, white monoculture and protecting it at all costs. Now Australia is changing. It's becoming a multicultural society. But still, I think that's one of the residual effects. In the 70s, 80s, and maybe up to the mid-90s, we actually had this sudden decision to commit ourselves to engaging with the rest of the world, engaging with Asia in particular, and Indonesia, our nearest neighbour. And so one of the ways to do that, obviously, was to learn the language, to teach and learn the language. But around the mid-90s, there was this kind of neoliberal turn. And also alongside that, there was this kind of resurgence in this kind of white protectionism in Australia. And languages, particularly Asian languages, was seen as having little value to our interests. And we started to, pursue, look away from Asia.
Yeah.
And if we engaged with Asia, it was going to be through the lens of English. Since the mid-90s, we've been facing that uphill battle to re-engage with Indonesia.
Yeah, I remember that it was really big at the time. I think it was like in early 1990s where Australian universities teaches providing Indonesian program. And I think there were about 22 universities providing Indonesian programs, and then lots of students, thousands of Australians enrolled in the program. So I remember that part of history. But then if you look at the current data, it's shocking. And but if I'm not mistaken, last year in 2022, the number of Australian universities teaching Indonesian, providing Indonesian programs, only like 12 universities, and that's including our campus. So this is really shocking and also quite disappointing. And if we see the comparison between Australia and other countries, China, for instance, China has been, developing Indonesian programs quite, significant in terms of the numbers of the schools and universities teaching Indonesian. I think in 2011, Chinese universities and schools in total, they have like 11 institutions actually providing Indonesian programs. And then within the next few years, it grows into 16 universities and schools providing Indonesian programs. On the other hand, Australia is declining significantly. And if you see the geographical distance between Indonesia and China and Indonesia and Australia, China is very far away. But they're aware that Indonesia can be a very strategic partner for China. On the other hand, Australia is like the closest neighbor to Indonesia, but seems to be, really left behind compared to China. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, it seems like, Australia sounds like it's in its comfort zone, and China is not really in its comfort zone. I think they have ambitions. They want to create new alliances, new global alliances. They're making inroads into the Asia Pacific and Africa. And one of the ways is through, connecting through language and developing that linguistic and cultural understanding, which can probably build up that impression of trust.
Yeah.
So, whereas Australia, sticking to its, monolingual philosophy, is aligning, with its traditional ally, the US, and to do so, you just need English, right? So, I think, strategically, we're being, I think, a bit lazy by not learning the language. And we have our foreign minister at the moment, Penny Wong, promoting Asian languages as, of strategic importance, etc.
Yeah.
But
do you think it's going to work?
I would just love to see, some more allocation in the budget.
That's right.
To actually actioning those words.
That's right.
But I think, that's her job she's basically a diplomat, so saying all the right things.
Yeah.
But I'd really like to see some substance, some support from the government as a whole.
And that is something that we can felt as the educator, basically, in the institutions providing, Indonesian language programs and all that.
It seems that, everything these days is rationalised as having its monetary value, through that neoliberal system. So it's kind of harder to justify the soft skill, the so-called soft skill of speaking a second language at the university level.
Yeah.
They don't see the immediate, return.
Right.
And I think, the term soft skill is kind of disparaging in a way, because being able to speak a second language opens so many doors, as we know, right?
That's right, yeah. Which is a shame if it's like all has to be considered based on money, How about people-to-people relations? As far as I know, I've been coming in and coming out of Australia, Indonesia for many years. And I've been engaging with different Australian communities here and also with Indonesian communities in Australia and then Australians in Indonesia as well. What I can see, and I think everybody who's been to Indonesia engaging with the Indonesian community there know this really well, that the people-to-people relations, which so-called as the second track diplomacy, is pretty much the main glue of the Australia-Indonesia relationships, and it's, of course, we're talking about money. Yes, that's an important thing, of course, but that actually can be supported by building these stronger people-to-people relations, building communities, building what do you call it, like cultural exchanges, student exchanges, Australians learning Indonesian language and culture by coming to Indonesia, and also Indonesians come to Australia learning, Australian cultures, feeling the taste of multiculturalism. Although Indonesia is also multicultural, we have like hundreds of ethnicities and also languages and cultures as well. You've been to Indonesia, and you're white. You said that there's something related with the historical. There's something the historical factor explains why. Less Australians are interested to engage with, other cultures outside Australia or learning, foreign languages like Indonesian. I mean, you as an Australian and you as a white, you seem to be like the opposite of what you said. What makes you, dare to choose to learn Indonesian? You're a teacher, you're teaching Indonesian, and, you're a dancer as well. You're a professional dancer. So what makes you different?
Well, I think the kind of person who wants to study Indonesian these days is somebody who likes to go against the grain, maybe curious, but also a bit rebellious.
Wow.
So I see...
So you're a rebel.
Yeah, I see Indonesia, out of all those languages that are out there, as the kind of bad boy language.
Right.
So, I mean... Japanese has been popular in Australia for many years as, the go-to Asian language, whereas Indonesia has kind of been overlooked. And, part of it, as I mentioned, is, that preference for monolingualism, but that doesn't explain everything. I think as well as that is Indonesia's image in Australia. And I think... in the last, let's say, 20 years, Indonesia's image through the media, through the Australian media, has been affected quite negatively. So we see it, we've seen terrorism, natural disasters, white people, bules, bules behaving badly, getting arrested,
That's right.
So it's seen as a little bit of a wild, untrustworthy place. And I think vice versa. I mean, Australia's not exactly a wild place, but I don't think Indonesians trust Australians as much as they used to.
That's true.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny, to think, 30 years ago, Indonesia was still, a military dictatorship.
That's right.
And it had the label of a developing country. But heaps of Australians wanted to learn about Indonesia and learn the language. And I think, it was just normal as an Australian academic to have something to do with Indonesia, to do a bit of research in your nearest Asian neighbour. That was a given, really. But yeah, these days, for those who want to learn the language, you really have to push back, against this, wave.
Getting out of the box.
Yeah, get out of the box and, go against the current. I'm using a lot of metaphors here, right?
Yeah.
So,
was that you a couple of years ago when the first time you getting out of that box and then you come to Indonesia and learn Indonesian? I mean, you came from Queensland, right? And you're not really exposed to Indonesian culture and community. So can you tell me your first experience until you step down to Indonesia for the first time? Yeah.
I'd love to tell you about that. It's because it's really part of who I am, part of my identity. It was like a really foundational moment in my life when I actually visited Indonesia. Before that, we actually had the last skerrick of Indonesian high school language. It was cancelled in, like, I think grade 10. So I had, a little bit of Indonesian.
Yeah.
But I did not take it seriously. None of us took it seriously at the time.
Right.
This was total white monoculture where I came from, rural Queensland. Mid-90s, mid-late 90s, Pauline Hanson, just down the road in Ipswich was,
So from your town?
not my town, near my state.
Right.
Yeah. So there was this, change taking place at the time. It's like this anti-Asian hatred, I guess, was starting to emerge. I mean, it didn't take over entirely, but the seeds were planted at that time. So for me, somebody who's always been a bit of an odd bod, somebody who goes against the grain, I wanted to rebel against what I was surrounded by because I didn't think that was fair or just to adopt such an anti-Asian stance. And with that little bit of Indonesian I had, we went to Indonesia for our first ever overseas holiday in Bali. Okay, wow. But for me, as a kid from rural Queensland, that was a big deal. And the moment I stepped off the plane, it was like a whole world opened up. So the smell, when you arrive in Indonesia, it's like a really sensory feast. So the smell, like a mix of kind of incense, clove cigarettes, kerosene at the time. Yeah, kerosene, I used to use a little kerosene.
You're mentioning all the nice smells of Indonesia.
Yeah.
I was thinking of Indonesians burning trash in front of their house.
Yeah, like I said, it's a sensory experience, and part of enjoying travel, I think, is to really open up your senses. And Indonesia is it's quite easy to notice some of these things. And then you notice the people, and you're moving through this thick tropical air. It's really different. And then the people are smiling, the people who are the baggage handlers. They're smiling, they're joking. And it's just like, wow, this is Australians, we say we're laid back, easygoing, but that's nothing compared to Indonesia.
Another level, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Was it hard to make friends there in Indonesia?
No, yeah.
Right.
As an Indonesians are just always willing to talk to anybody, really, right?
That's right.
It's easy to strike up a conversation, and the moment you use just a little bit of your Indonesian language, they're like, wow, you can speak Indonesian. Oh, so cool. And so you get that confidence boost and motivation, like that social satisfaction that, oh wow, my language, through my language I can meet people, make connections, and I can feel like this sense of reward as well.
You're being welcomed, basically. It doesn't matter where you're from.
No. Yeah.
Unless you're really drunk and somewhere in the Bali beach, in Kuta beach or something.
Yeah, or if you bring a boogie board full of, you won't be welcome so much. But, in general, you're just walking down the street, which is kind of a bit odd for Indonesia. But anyway, on the street, people will talk to you. You may get some unwanted,
That's right.
attention, perhaps, but I'll take that. If it means that among all these smiling, friendly faces, I can actually get this human connection.
That's true, actually. Yeah, I remember I was very friendly with people. I was always happy to meet new people, basically, especially from different countries. I always try to be friends with them, make friends with them. But now I realize actually not all people want to make friends with you, Indra. So, but that's typically what I was in the past, and that actually describes what what you said about Indonesian, which is true. And it's not hard to make friends in Indonesia. Although you got to be choosing who you want to make friends with, right? Like you can't just be friends with the whole village. Yeah. And
Although it is possible, really, if you're a bule and you move to a village,
that's true.
you'll know everybody within a week, basically.
That's right.
Yeah. There's no real privacy in Indonesia, hey?
That's true. And people want to take a photo with you the whole time.
Yeah, I think hopefully they get over that at some point.
Yeah, I'm sure. Especially when they're already friends with you and they're just like, you're just, you're just like us now.
Yeah.
So, so before you said about the media images of Indonesia seems to be like, dark, negative, and that's the fact. Every time I see news on televisions, it's always like, I always ask my wife, like, I'm kind of, curious how the news kind of tell about my country. And it's always something serious, it's always something bad, either disaster, either about Sharia law, there's strict Sharia law, about the, the political competitions that brings conflicts and all that. It seems to be that our image seems to be, showing the world, particularly Australian society, that, it's not really a nice place to go to. But on the other hand, Australian government's actually now supporting engagement with Asian countries, especially Indonesia. There seems to be like a contradiction there. But knowing that, based on your experience, personal experience, actually Indonesia is like, much better than what has been depicted in the media. And that brings me to another question, like if Australian perceptions of Indonesia can be that negative or skeptical, then what kind of Australian students willing to enroll in Indonesian programs, either at UNE or somewhere else?
Yeah, I think in my experience at UNE, we've attracted like a really diverse bunch of people. But the people who stick with it are usually the people who at some stage, either during their study or beforehand, have been to Indonesia. And it's like when you go there, there's something magic, something in the air. It could be the burning garbage.
Burning garbage smell?
No. There's something in that warm tropical air, I think, that can really attract you and hook you in and makes you want to come back. Could be the bad boy effect. Yeah.
That's true, actually.
And also, we've got some people who just learn the language because they have an interest in it from a linguistic perspective as well. Indonesian is really different to English, but it's a fairly systematic language.
Right.
It's not true that it's an easy language.
That's right, yeah.
But it's quite systematic. So, like, if you learn the rules, then it can be kind of like this rewarding process. And some people, as they get older, they want to maintain their cognitive capacity. Their flexibility. So learning the language through that point of view can be really rewarding as well. The students we attract are very diverse. So we've got, mushroom farmers, nurse, mechanic. So there's not one single type of student.
That's right.
But I think they're all kind of united by this common passion for Indonesia.
Yeah.
Like I know one of my students named his son Bali.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
That's the first time I heard about that.
Yeah.
Wow. What's the long name? Was it Muhammad Bali? No?
Nah, like Ketut Bali. Yeah. And I guess as well, like when it comes to the media coverage of Indonesia, the media is known to report on negative events. That's just the nature of news. It's usually something shocking. But it's also to do with the way those kind of negative events are covered.
That's right.
Yeah, so the way that, for example, a flood in Indonesia is covered will be way different to the way it's covered in, I don't know, the US. You know, so there'll be probably, I haven't analysed it, but there's probably like there's greater emphasis on danger or lack of control. So people who are watching it, they'll want to trust the news, they'll want to believe what they hear and what they see. So they'll come to form this opinion that, don't go to Indonesia.
That's right. So basically you need that little bit of, you know, that elements of you being against the currents, basically. Being a rebel. So rebelling and also being curious and adventurous. And then you can see the difference by the time you come to Indonesia, right?
Even if you're not a rebel, even if you're not a particularly adventurous person, I think Indonesia can transform you.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I found also from my my mother-in-law, who has worked in Indonesia for many years in 1970s, and now she's back in Australia, and she always say to me that she miss Indonesia, and one of them was the chaotic environment when she's in the traffic, you know, on the road, like so chaotic. Or if you go to the market, traditional markets, very chaotic, and she misses that chaotic vibe of Indonesia that you cannot find here in Australia. Everything here is very, you know, what do you call it? Program, not really program, it's more like regular routine. We have the same routine every day, but in Indonesia, things can be very different every minute. I'm not making this up because I used to be like that. Now I've become really, really, you know, stuck in my routine. This is what I'm going to do in the morning, during the day, when I go home. But in Indonesia, it's very unpredictable of what might happen to you. You might get bored in the morning, but you might get fun later during the day. Or
like someone might contact you and say, hey, we got this on, do you want to come over?
That's right.
It's just like spontaneous, right?
And you have the schedule and you just like, you know, get rid of this, and you just go out with your friends, you know, hang out somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's nice to go to Indonesia to get that break from, you know, the monotony of life in Australia.
That's right.
Australia is too safe, maybe.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Wow, that's really fun. That makes me want to go home now.
Yeah. So I think one of the words kangen, you know, kangen Indonesia, I think it's such an important word.
What kangen means?
Oh, it's a longing. It's Indonesia calling you. I don't want to exoticize Indonesia, but there's something about it that really is hard to forget. Like your mother-in-law, you know, how many years ago is that? Like
since 1970s. So
50 years?
Yeah, 50 years ago.
Yeah. Still kangen. Masih kangen.
So she's Australian, and she met her husband, my father-in-law, who's also Australian, British Australian. They met together. They met each other in Sulawesi for humanitarian work, basically, and they met there, and they fell in love, and then they have a daughter, and I'm married to their daughter, and it's just amazing. I think that's the result of a people-to-people relations, basically, throughout the decades, and. Yeah.
And I think that's something you can't really easily measure in monetary terms, you know, like the positive effects of, you know, people-to-people relations, like and being in country as well.
Yeah, that's right. Totally agree.
Yeah.
All right, Jane. It seems we have come to the, end of our conversation for this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are we going to do now?
Well, so I just want to say, for those of you out there who are making an effort to learn Indonesian, I really salute you. And for those of you who are interested in learning Indonesian, you're always welcome to join us at UNE, join our little community of online learners.
We'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, sampai jumpa.
Sampai jumpa.